I often get asked if it is too late to get into the Lord of the Rings Online as a new player because it is an older MMO. Well, there are many reasons that I play LOTRO and many reasons I find it worth sticking around. Obviously, I am not a new player. So, to get better insight on the starting experience in-game, I made a brand new account and roleplayed as a new player. Like most MMOs, my adventure started with tweaking game settings and arranging my user interface. After that riveting experience, I went through the intro, which was a bit mixed with fast and slow paced, but the real excitement began when I entered the open world of Middle-earth. Without much of an end goal with this character, there was actually a lot available for me to do, but I think the obvious path of progression and what I was leaning towards was to just simply level up. Ultimately, taking on this fresh perspective and playing just a couple hours in my experience as role-playing as a new player, I did find some deeper insights into why it may be worth starting LOTRO as a new or returning player in 2023. The first reason is if you are looking for a game to scratch the classic MMO itch. LOTRO's combat is fairly old school at this point, and it is something that I personally love. I also enjoy the questing system and way we progress not only through the game as a whole, but also the individual zones. But before I take a deeper dive into the content, I do have to comment on the gameplay. So in my roleplay session, LOTRO had just the excitement I would be looking for in an MMO with gameplay and character building. It may take a moment to get used to LOTRO's combat system, where ability timing is based on animation speeds rather than a more traditional global cooldown system. But I think the different class fantasies and variety of gameplay loops for the classes offer a reason to start LOTRO, and certainly for me, the classic MMO gameplay gives me a pretty big reason to play LOTRO. And while I would not know about this as a new player, thanks to the recent Clash Trait Point revamp, I could progress my character's traits every level or two, improving and unlocking new abilities. There's honestly not much to it besides being just exciting and letting me build out my character as I want. It also gives me something to look forward to as I level up in the game. But back to the content of LOTRO, this builds into the second big reason I find the game worth starting, which is the immersive experience LOTRO offers. While I love the MMO component of LOTRO being an MMORPG, I have to admit that one of the biggest excitements starting the game is the RPG component, where you just progress through the open world of Middle-earth at your own pace. There are a lot of hours of adventure to look forward to, and even with a brand new account, the monetization revamp from 2022 means that I had content up through Helm's Deep unlocked for free, which goes up to level 95, which really is a ton of content. But back on that note of immersion, this is where LOTRO really starts to shine. Not being a new player and having actually played through the vast majority of the content in the game, I can definitely say LOTRO has a lot of immersive zones, storylines, and quests. It is admittedly not a great game to rush through the content with the sole goal to get to the level cap and get hooked into the end-game gameplay loop. A couple issues you may run into with this also include a very intimidating level cap, which is currently level 140 at the time of this video, and you will also find yourself running out of content relatively quickly. Ultimately, LOTRO may not be worth starting if you're looking for a rush to the cap and run through in-game content style MMO, but it is more likely to be worth starting if you're looking for a journey in the Lord of the Rings universe. On top of the overall immersion, and at least to me very fun zone storylines that aren't a part of the central Lord of the Rings book stories, one of the things I do love about LOTRO, and the third big reason I find LOTRO worth starting, is that it does offer a fairly true to lore gameplay experience in the world of Middle-earth. Now, as somebody who I do have to admit hasn't actually read the Lord of the Rings books, LOTRO is what has gotten me immersed into the world of the Lord of the Rings lore, and honestly just made me so interested in Middle-earth. That has actually cycled back and made me more interested and invested in the lore and storylines in the LOTRO game. So it's a little bit backwards, but still has this positive feedback loop. And this is honestly just a very easy answer that LOTRO is at least worth starting if you're interested in an immersive and very expansive Lord of the Rings world that covers the forming of the Fellowship to the destruction of the ring and even beyond that. Outside of the content of the game, one of the hidden reasons LOTRO is worth starting, and especially sticking around if you do happen to start, is the community. LOTRO is widely praised for its community. In-game, you will find a lot of helpful players in the server-wide chat channels. There are also many new and returning player-friendly kinships, which are LOTRO's versions of guilds. If you are into these sort of thing, there are also many community-run events and festivals. For some people, even these alone would actually be a reason LOTRO is worth starting. Something that I have always talked about in my LOTRO reviews is group content and how much I love it, but to be honest, when I was starting fresh, group content never came up, and it actually is going to be hard to find on-level groups for low-level dungeons in LOTRO. If you do start LOTRO though, I would definitely recommend trying to run dungeons as they come up if you can manage to find a group, and one way that you might be able to is by joining a kinship where players have low-level characters to run on-level group content as they level up in LOTRO. One of the features of LOTRO that is advertised and has been getting a lot of updates recently is player versus monster player, or LOTRO's version of PvP. But in my fresh start, one, PvMP never came up, and something that I also realized in that experience is that it's a completely separate ecosystem that didn't really have anything to draw me to it. Even from my veteran perspective, PvMP has not had any draw without having like a preformed group to experience it with. So based on this and the investment that you need to actually get started with PvMP, both from the free peoples, which are your normal characters perspective, and the monster player side, I ultimately don't think LOTRO is worth starting just for a PvP experience as other MMOs might be. Some other features of the game that certainly give reasons to stick around and continue playing LOTRO, but don't necessarily come into play for somebody who's like just starting, include one, the new delving system, especially considering that's like only for level cap characters. There's also the skirmish system, which is fairly fun, but ultimately it's just like a piece in the puzzle of instance-based LOTRO content. Crafting is another big thing in MMOs and is actually expected to have a rework this year, but definitely at this time it's not worth starting LOTRO just to get like your crafting fix. In fact, I'm personally eagerly awaiting the Lord of the Rings Return to Moria game for a more crafting oriented RPG to try out. Back to some content though, epic battles, as epic as the name sounds, are kind of like skirmishes, and they're really just a piece of the LOTRO instance-based content puzzle, and I don't think they alone are worth starting the game for. In a similar vein, mounted combat, this one's actually pretty interesting because it is a fairly unique feature, but honestly it's kind of rough, and it's not terrible, but what you will find is your character plays completely differently on the worsted mount, and generally this is not going to be in a good way, so I don't find LOTRO worth starting for mounted combat if that is something that piqued your interest if you saw that as a feature. And really, I could keep going on because there's honestly a lot of little parts of LOTRO like these that help make LOTRO LOTRO and that help keep me playing as a veteran player, but individually aren't necessarily worth starting the game for. What it boils down to is LOTRO is a classic style open world MMO based on the Lord of the Rings books with some great questing, story content, and very high immersion factor. It is a game built for enjoying the journey and going on adventures in Middle Earth, and in essence, if that is what you are looking for, then LOTRO could very well be worth starting for you. Please let me know in the comments if you think LOTRO is worth starting as a new or returning player in 2023. I hope you found this review and my attempt at a unique starter perspective helpful, and if you haven't yet, consider liking and subscribing for more LOTRO content, and thanks for watching everyone.